King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
So, might not be a super long program tonight. We all know that everything else that was going on in the media was, overshadowed by the fact we had the first presidential debate here in the United States that was getting a lot of cover. And so, all the Hollywood rags were all talking about that. And anything else media related was talking about politics. So, that's one of those things where I'm not talking about that in this program. I could care less. I do care, but I could care less about giving my own opinion here on the air. And I hope you understand that, with some, 337 episodes I think I've done to this program, the fact that I've always wanted to keep this show as apolitical as possible is very important to me. Because, for those out there, media already has enough of that politicization out there in the first place. There's so many media sources that, and when I first started doing this program, I didn't like the fact I couldn't find a media show that likened to what I like. They didn't kind of inject their politics into it. I'm like, I don't like that shit. And that's the part I didn't want to be a part of. If you want talk radio, you got talk radio. You want to go ahead and watch cable news, you got cable news. But don't put your politics into my content. Media, there's politics that can be talked about. And hell, there's more than enough shows out there that have people talking about politics in the media. Okay. We have that as well. We understand that part. But for me, it's I don't want to be a part of that whole mess. It's very repetitive. I feel like nobody can say anything more or be much more. It's what strong words can you do to get one side or the other to go ahead and get somebody riled up and pissed off, or get the other side pissed off, or the echo chambers that everybody has within their own political structures of all these different channels that are out there. As I said, my thing I've always said for the longest time is I want my news to be straight news without any bias or opinion. That's all I want. Free speech, let it be amongst those that can go ahead and talk about it. There's social media out there. A lot of people can go and find a platform on there to go and talk about. And if they find some reason or whatever to go ahead and, be ostracized by whatever social media source that's out there that doesn't want them on, they go somewhere else. Unless they're completely shut down. But, we're starting to see that there are some places that are free speech havens. X, Rumble, among other places. Meanwhile, others might have some issues because we don't have as many of those issues because we have other sources that people go to for the social media. In the political structure, the politics will go and fall to other places. And I don't want any of that. I want this to be neutral. I'm independent myself. So for those that, would expect me to go and talk about the debate, that's about as much politics as you'll ever hear me here on any program here at all. And that goes for all of my programming. The King of Podcasts Radio Network, yours truly, okay, I control all of it, okay? I host, edit, produce, record, promote, all of it. And I will always make it a testament to all of you. I will vow to you that I will always keep my content apolitical. Now, sometimes we might get guests or content that might be put into a political sense because that's where we are. But I'm going to stay neutral about it. There's enough talking heads out there to talk about politics. They don't need someone like me to go and do that, okay? Now, don't get me wrong. If I wanted to talk politics, I could speak a lot about it, but I'm not going to. I really don't talk about that to anybody. I got a couple of friends that I talk about this with regularly, okay? And that's about it. And one of the people that you might have heard me talk about anything political with is, Lou Pate, who I've actually had on, who's allowed me on his various stints of radio broadcasting wherever he's been, whether it's been in Connecticut or Philadelphia or, wherever else. The thing was I get the chance to go ahead and be on the air with him, and I took the opportunity about it. But we were talking about entertainment related issues because for me, I don't want to go ahead and bring up other things that are, he knows I'm not going to go over political on things because that's not my department. Meanwhile, the station might be on whenever he's talking about things that is political. But for me, it's I'm independent about these things. No one needs to go and hear my opinion on things. There's so many opinions out there, period, anyway. So we'll just leave it at that. I'm more concerned about how it's being presented, the structure of the presentation of news. Opinion and commentary, opinion editorial, that's fine. But I want it separated. I want it clearly labeled and stated as such. It's not that hard. But that's been the downfall of the news industry in general. Because they allowed opinion and editorial to go by the wayside. That is why they've been failing. That's why over the last couple of weeks we talked about AI companies like OpenAI, makers of ChatGPT, owned by Microsoft, or Google Gemini, where there are Google AI previews and things like that. What's happening is the news companies right now, or the corporations that own these news companies, they're making deals with tech AI. We talked about that, and I did get quite a bit of press about it. And by the way, I mean to make mention of the fact that I did the episode on Afrobeats last week. I really appreciate those that did take time to go and catch the program and hear my take on it, because it was fun doing that, and it was really interesting to go through that whole aspect of music. I love those music episodes, and it's nice to go and do those when there's things that are happening that just give me the opportunity to go and bring it up when the iron's hot. So that's why I did it, and I enjoy it. If it was something I could do more of, it would be nice, but it's part of that radio side of me as well that enjoys new music. And when there's new trends that are coming along that cross over, because 90s, 2000s, and the 80s as well, when music used to cross over. And remember, this was even more before 2000s. Before the internet, we used to have a lot of songs, a lot of music that would cross over. And I was going back to the rock and roll era. And we always had music that would cross over into different genres and become mainstream. And I've talked about that on the program. And it's been fascinating. And I love it. But now let's get back to news. Tech AI right now has all the opportunity to go ahead and dominate. So because of the whining, moaning, and complaining that news companies have had, saying, well, we should put some kind of bargaining code. Okay, that you should go ahead and be paying us. We should charge a fee, newspapers, publications, magazines. We should charge tech companies like Facebook, Meta, parents of Facebook, Alphabet, owners of Google, and other tech companies. We want you to go ahead and start paying us for allowing our content on your search results, because we're not getting the advertising revenue off of that. So to make up for that, they were trying to go and make it where, like in Australia or Canada, which they have done horrendously with that, trying to make these companies pay for their content. And now at the point where these news publications are now asking AI companies, they're going to get an advance in their revenue, but at what cost? Because once the AI platforms are able to integrate the archival content of these newspapers, these magazines, and once they're able to get that all inputted into these systems, and the machine learning is able to be done, let me tell you, just wait and see what happens when we get to the point where these publications will be rendered useless, because it's just like every other corporate structure, okay? It's just like everything else. See, corporations, they do the same thing. They go ahead and, do a barrage on people that they'll take into a new sector, a new industry, and or just whatever there is in media, they'll just take a spot, and there'll be people that have pioneered, created, molded, enhanced, harnessed, and curated great quality content. And then when these corporations decide to come in, because they want to go ahead and, make them public or make them privately equity owned, and they just pick them apart, and they're going to learn the process of how all this quality is done, and then they're going to learn how to use their processes to create the blueprint that's already been put in place to create content on the cheap with as low quality as possible, the lowest common denominator of effort necessary, and micromanage and middle manage this shit to death. But this is where tech and the digital disruption I've talked about since the inception of this program has continuously been the arbiter of putting making these big corporations accountable for their sins, for their mistakes. Streaming has ultimately affected the music industry, the radio industry, and they're both hurting. And the issues that the record labels do right now, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that they're going through right now to try to get royalties, trying to get it from radio because radio's not paying enough. Or they have to go after radio because streaming is taking away at their bottom line. So when music labels, record labels can't make the kind of money they used to. If they can't make the money like they used to with artists, and streaming has taken away their physical units that they used to go ahead and herald and cherish so well, so they could sell records and they can make money off of that. When streaming takes that away and forces, the fact that digital downloads might not make as much money, and that streaming royalties are minuscule compared to what they could be making when they were selling physical units, well, they want to try to find that money from elsewhere. And, the system that used to be around to promote and to help have radio push out their content in long form, just enough to get people to go and buy singles and then buy albums, or either or. Well, radio, because of the corporations, they made sure they didn't pay that many more royalties than they already have, or cut the amount of royalties they were paying. And now these corporations are going to be having to deal with the fact that, they're going to have to deal with the fact that they're going to be paying more royalties. And listen, Curtis, the guy from the National Association of Broadcasters, speaking in front of Congress, trying to go ahead and stop this from happening. A localization act where, live and local radio will be thrown away because of the fact you're going to take all this money away from them. Well, whose fault is that? These corporations that took these stations over. The current act that they're trying to put into place, certain smaller radio stations are not going to get hurt so much by the royalties. It'll be these big radio stations owned by corporations that will be hurt the most. And justifiably so. They deserve that. You understand just as much as I do. If you've listened to this program long enough, you know that I want these corporations to implode. I want them to give up these radio stations. For them to go and take deregulation like they did and to get destroyed that they are in right now, that they're handling so much debt and they're handling so much, in terms of interest they can't pay on. And all these companies continue to keep laying off good people. Some people that stayed around even before the corporations took over. And there's so many long-term people I keep seeing all the time, 30, 40 years in the industry, that they're getting let go. They're getting laid off. One of the stories that really bothered me today, I saw a couple of days ago. Okay, Cox Media Group is one of those right now that is in play right now and really starting to make some cuts. And so that happened where they took several people off of radio station Hot 105, the number one radio station in the market. Now, I don't know if it still is, but if I went and look at it right now, I'm pretty sure they're close to being at that point. But I have to go and look for that real quick. Now, in the recent releases from markets, I'll tell you real quick right now. When it comes to the Miami market, which is market number 11, the latest PPM ratings show Hot 105 is by far the number one station right now. Number one station in the market, 9.2. They are well ahead of, in the top five, you got WAMR, Spanish Contemporary, Amor 107.5. I shouldn't do it in Spanish. Easy 93.1, which has been number one a number of times from Cox Media, but also is having some issues. They're now in third place. Light 101.5, WLYF, an Odyssey station. They are more or less the same format as Easy 93.1, so those stations kind of cancel each other out. And a new station that came into the light, which is WMIA's Magic 93.9, Spanish Classic Hits. So Spanish formats obviously do well in the market, especially the older format, as what they're doing right now. But yes, WHQT Coral Gables, Hot 105, they let go of several personalities. Miami Herald reported this, and two names that were taken off the station. Jill Tracy's one of them. And if I'm correct, okay, Jill Tracy's been working in radio for more than 30 years. She co-hosted the morning show at Hot 105 and created her own talk show, which airs on Sunday nights. And then the other person he decided to go and let go is James T. Thomas. James T. is an institution in Miami radio, in urban contemporary black radio in Miami. James T. and Jill Tracy this week have been fired according to sources. The reasoning behind their firing is unclear, but Cox Media Group, which owns Hot 105 and 99 Jams, has yet to return a request for comment. So, Jill Tracy has been around in radio for 30 years and been in South Florida for more than a decade. She was let go after her morning show appearance on Monday. Tracy tells the Miami Herald, quote, "They're just trying to cut everywhere they can because they aren't doing the numbers that they used to." How's that possible? Hot 105 is number one right now in the market. Are you talking about revenue that they're not making? I don't know, but like they're the number one station in the market. Right now on Nielsen Radio. Nielsen Audio standings, they're number one. Overall 12 plus. Then James T., he's been around for over 50 years on the station. Okay? First of all, he helped to launch 99 Jams, WEDR, the urban radio station 99 Jams, in 1990. And hosted the morning show there for a long time. I want to say he was there for, 25 years there? And then he left, and they moved him over to Hot 105 to do afternoons, or middays, excuse me. And James T. has been around forever. You know, a institution when it comes to the community, for doing community events, and just being a supporter. And that's what happened. And so, for that to just go along, and just, okay, in my market, I look at this man, and like I was saying, 50 years of radio, that James T., survived all this. But of course, he probably has a great pension and all this that might have been a part of this or whatever he's getting right now. But it's like, yeah, done. Let him go. For what? It's a sad day of affairs to see those two go away. Jill Tracy, always with the 411. That's what Michelle did. That was her way. That was kind of her stamp of how you knew that was her on the air. I think she was on with Rick Party, and I forget who she was on with. Oh, no, when they used to run Steve Harvey on Hot 105, or Ricky Spa on Hot 105, that she would be on in the morning doing regular segments locally, while that show's going on. But that's what they decided to do. So radio there, that's one of the problems they have. Is a big problem. I couldn't stand it. It's horrible. I'm going to stick with radio while I go and bring that up. I'm going to bring up another story, which I talked about just a minute ago. Broadcasters to Congress talking about the royalty payments would undercut history of radio localism. Well, no, the radio stations are, these corporate radio companies are doing the same thing by themselves. So lawmakers looking for a sign of compromise in the decades-old fight over whether radio stations should pay a music royalty for on-air performances. There was a House hearing Wednesday showing the two sides remain far apart. So they talked to several people on the panel, one representing Music Exchange and then other radio programmers, and including the NAB president and CEO Curtis Legate. He says that such an abrupt change in law would be wholly inconsistent with Congress's long-held approach to copyright policy and devastating to the local service that Americans depend on with radio. Legate says, quote, "It has already been proven extremely difficult for local broadcast stations to innovate online due to the burdensome costs. It would be devastating to add those additional royalties to terrestrial airplay when we're already generating such significant promotional value to artists." No, you're not. That's what you used to do. But we already know that radio promotion departments have been, if not all eliminated, but almost all eliminated. And that's going back several years ago. I want to say it was even before the pandemic. That streaming is now crucial to record labels. They're promoting to the streamers and to satellite. They're not promoting the radio anymore. Radio is insignificant because radio is a secondary market. I've said it before. Radio is a flea market. Okay. This is when you have the secondary market of music to go ahead and put out there. Okay. And it's not even like the most important part because, streaming is now priority. They still have their downloads and they have sales from stores and all. But radio is like, well, it's the last place people can go to find music or to listen to anything. Okay? You might find something in the department store, and then it might go into a secondary store that sells seasonal merchandise, off-season merchandise, like a Burlington or a TJ Maxx or a Ross. You know what I'm talking about? Nordstrom Rack. Saks off Fifth, right? But then there's the flea market. And then that's where you find other music that might be out there, but it's like, it's all on CD and it's all like other formats. You're not listening to it anywhere over there. Not a lot of people are going to look there for music. Would you trust the people that are selling the music to you in the flea market as well? Think about it like that. Urban One Cleveland's general manager Eddie Harrell talked to the House Judiciary Subcommittee that the changing marketplace will be devastating for stations that are struggling to stay open, pay bills, and hire employees. What about all these companies right now? Corporations, by the way, Urban One also hurting in debt. We talked about that before. And now we're at the point where, these radio stations now, they were so poor. Oh, we're so small. We don't have anybody here. No, you have these companies that have $1 to $5 billion in debt. And they can't pay off the interest. They're just extending their loans, extending their liens as far as they can go. And they're not paying off the rest of their debt after they've gone through bankruptcy. Just ask Cumulus, iHeartRadio, or iHeartMedia, and now ask Odyssey as they're getting themselves through bankruptcy as well. Sound Exchange President Michael Hupp, who is on the other side, he says radio is overplaying the risk it faces. He told lawmakers that Nielsen data, 80% of all Americans listen to radio, and the industry had $15 billion in revenue last year. To put it bluntly, quote, for over a century, AM/FM radio has been stealing the music, suggesting under the proposal many stations would pay as little as $1.37 a day in royalties. Right. But the people that are really hurting about this are the big corporate companies. That's why. Legate says a lot of local broadcasters are operating on extremely tight margins as big tech continues to siphon away ad dollars. The NAB estimates it will mean hundreds of millions of dollars in new costs for the industry. You're not going to see local service with those kind of costs because they're in debt. They could go very well. These companies wouldn't harbor and, hold on to all these stations and their debt if they would just go ahead and hoard. You're right, hoarding these stations. If they would stop hoarding these stations and let them go, sell them off in the trust, whatever you got to do. Get as much as you can for those stations. The towers, the signals, all of it. Sell it off because you can't afford it anymore. But they don't talk about that part. The proposed American Music Fairness Act, H.R. 7091, or Senate Bill 253, would require broadcast stations to pay royalties when they play music. The smallest operations with less than $100,000 in annual revenue, which a lot of stations, the local stations that I know of, if they were doing that part, they would pay $10 a year in on-air royalties. $10 a year. Those with $100,000 to $1.5 million in revenue would pay $100 a year if it's a public radio station, $500 if it's a commercial station. The other stations would be left to the Copyright Royalty Board, with the bill requiring it to develop 5-year licensing agreements with the music industry and radio. See, it's these big companies that are worried about what happens here. Just keep that in mind. And there were some of the people from the music side that wanted to go ahead and represent at the event. Randy Travis was appearing with his wife, Mary, and unfortunately Randy Travis cannot really speak or say too much because he's been silenced due to a stroke. So his wife spoke for the couple, saying that royalties his music has generated is what they've counted on for survival and Randy's long-term care. And then more talk about this is that they say that to the music industry, a radio royalty is a matter of fairness. If streaming services and SiriusXM pay artists for their use, so should AM/FM. Proponents of the law argue that it would open $200 to $300 million in royalties to American artists and overseas radio royalties. But Legate said that the comparison is also flawed, since no other country has a locally focused radio model like the U.S. So local broadcasts, trying to say, they can't afford it. They can't, take this kind of cost. Well, why don't you talk about who owns those stations, Curtis? Mr. Legate, why don't you talk about who owns those stations? Because you're speaking for them. They're lobbying you. And then you're lobbying these Congress people, these policymakers, to keep radio off of the track of having to go and pay for royalties. And we know there's bipartisan bills on both sides. and one that the NAB supports, trying to go and stop that, to not allow it to happen. So streaming services, they've been fought with right now. TikTok, remember, let's not forget that. The music companies have been fighting with all streaming social media. They've been fighting with streaming services. They fought with SiriusXM. They're getting royalties. Radio has to pay their fair share as well. And I think with the American Music Fairness Act, that it is fair. Again, there's not a lot of stations that might be playing music that they're not making, $100,000 to $1.5 million in revenue. That's a lot of money for some of these stations. But imagine if they only had to pay $100 to $500 a year for royalties, and that's it. And they get to play all the music they want. Imagine that. And then the CRB would develop licensing agreements. And then they could have things set up where radio will start paying royalties. That's smart. You can't live with the days because, see, local radio, you see, the thing is, even Curtis again talking about this, it's the cost quotient. They're not talking about the fact that they're not thinking about the musicians or the songwriters or the artists of mind that provide the content for your stations. You're worrying about the money that's coming in. You're just like every other radio broadcast, every other corporate radio, schlub. You're caring about the money that comes in. So you're taking away money that's coming in our pockets. Well, what about the money you're taking away from the musicians and the artists? I mean, if I was working on a music radio station, I'd be happy to go and pay royalties for the artists. I'd want to be able to say, okay, I'm doing the right thing by playing their music, and I also want to do the right thing by making sure they're getting paid for it. Whatever little bit that's going to be coming from us. I'd be happy to do that, personally. And then the record labels have their issue continuing on because Hollywood Reporter talks about how record companies right now are trying to go after lawsuits, and the issue is with the AI, right? Record labels counter with $350 million lawsuits in an assertive move. The impact of generative artificial intelligence may be more readily seen in music than in other industries, and record companies are looking arm in arm to fight back. So they're going after tech AI. There are over 25 copyright infringement lawsuits filed against AI companies for the most corners of the creative industries. And groups here having sued, including artists, authors, and news publishers, are going after what they say is alleged mass theft of their copyrighted works that teach AI systems. And record companies have taken the most aggressive stance thus far in trying to get out in front of the technology. Yeah, lawsuits. That's a good way to go and get the AI companies to help you on board. So the publishers, news publishers, they're just going to go ahead and say, well, first of all, they were going to try to, go after them with the government and say, you got to pay us for what we're missing out on advertising revenue. For the record labels, well, we're just going to sue you. That's it. So lawsuits filed in federal courts in New York and Massachusetts, led by Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, and Warner Music, accuse Suno AI and Uncharted Labs, developers of Udio AI, of illegally powering their AI systems on massive troves of copyrighted recordings. So they're looking for injunctions, forcing the companies to cease further infringement, including destruction of models taught in the IP and damages of nearly $350 million. A lot of money they're asking for. The lawsuits expand multi-front legal battles waged by creators that have the potential to prevent further encroachment of technology into creative industries. The Recording Association, Industry Association of America, views the unregulated creation of AI-generated content as an existential threat, primarily due to the possibility that they'll directly compete against human-made tracks and disrupt the market for music samples. Well, you weren't ready for AI to come in, Like, you might have dealt with the issues with piracy and people copying music and all that, but this is something you can't take care of. When you lost the war to Napster and streaming became possible, and you did not have a battle plan ready for the digital disruption, now we're at the point where not only has your music been pirated for the longest time, or it can be streamed, at a very good price for consumers for a long time. Well, now we're at the point where, AI's come in. So you now have models and platforms and technology that can go ahead and create music themselves based off your content. And now you're going to have to sue them because you have no other course of action. Music labels, ill-prepared for what happens here. On a multi-pronged approach, by the way, when it comes to the musicianship, the music themselves, and where they promote it. You know, should have been paying attention a little bit more. There's more information about this where music publishers are urging Georgia and other states to investigate Spotify. So in Georgia, we're hearing about this. Atlanta Journal-Constitution talked about this. This was actually last week that came out, but we'll talk about it here. A trade group representing songwriters and music publishers filed a complaint against Spotify with the Federal Trade Commission that the music streaming platform's decision to bundle subscriptions is deceiving consumers. So Georgia is one of 10 states to which the National Music Publishers Association sent its complaint, encouraging attorneys to generally investigate the matter on behalf of Spotify customers in their states. And there's a strong interest in protecting songwriters and robust consumer protection laws. There's more about this, but of course there's a big fat paywall from Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm sure if I took a story and I went ahead and put it on AI on Google Gemini, I could probably find out more information about it, but I'm not going to waste my time to go and do that. Don't need to. And when it comes to streaming, there's a story that came off of IndieWire. Jason Kilar, who's the CEO of Warner Media, says that the idea of Spotify for Hollywood. So he talks about this, that they should replace the streaming media bundles that are suddenly chic. And what he's talking about is that could streaming go all the way into all-in-one platforms like Spotify? So he talks about this, a Spotify for Hollywood path, where a large number of suppliers and studios contribute to a singular experience that delights fans. Studios would be the ones that would be taking the majority of the economic returns from such a structure. So don't create their own platforms. Just go into one. The proposed concept would be that major studios would be licensing movies and TV shows to the platform, with 70% of the revenue going to the studios. Kind of like a Blockbuster concept, right? Or maybe it was something that Netflix kind of had actually early on in their whole setup, right? In 2022, Kilar actually wrote his predictions for the streaming business, that no more than 3 global entertainment companies are likely to attain the streaming service scale required, 300 million global subscriptions at $15 a month to generate attractive cash flows. He says that's only 3 companies that could have done that. Interesting story. I mean, I can see where he kind of goes with that. At the moment, if I had to look at who were the most prominent companies right now to hit that number, I guess what? Netflix, Amazon Prime. I don't think there's anybody else right now that really hits that spot that high anyway. Not right now anyway. You'd have to conglomerate. You have to collaborate with other companies to do that. I mean, I guess Disney plus Hulu would be the other example. Disney, Hulu, ESPN, but there's not much else there is. It's kind of limited on that point. Oh, and I forgot to mention this part where iHeartMedia now, you know how there are issues with, right now with the podcast division and how they went in and unionized with WGA East? Well, now we have a new first union contract for iHeartMedia workers. And the 100-member bargaining unit began negotiating with management after the union was recognized in 2022. So yeah, Writers Guild East of America East have ratified their first labor contract with iHeartMedia. 99% of the 100-member group voted to ratify the contract. And so, new agreement now allows a minimum base salary of $63,000 for workers in Los Angeles and New York, and $58,000 for workers in other areas, according to the union. Annual minimum wage increases are 3% in the first year of the contract, 2% in the second and third years, and the agreement provides time and half pay assigned on a holiday. And also they will get preserving a 401k matching program, initiating just cause, a maximum of 16 weeks of severance, and the right to bargain of the use of AI at work. And the contract also provided for greater transparency on show metrics and spending. How long do you think iHeartMedia is going to handle this? But that's how much money they're going to go with anyway. They figure that's what they're going to go with anyway, and that's it. The WGA East president, Lisa Takuchi, says that this now sets a new bar for people who work in the podcast industry, and that the union will continue to fight raise industry standards in podcasting. The WGA also represents audio podcast workers at Crooked Media, Spotify Studios, The Ringer, Pushkin Industries, and Pineapple Street Media. So congratulations to them. One other story I want to bring up before we wrap things up. Like I said, it was going to be a short show tonight. Not a whole lot I could bring off on the table here, but at least wanted to get some things in here tonight. Sometimes we have these kind of shows, like 35, 40 minutes. It just happens. Neiman Reports talks about the battle over using journalism to build AI models is just starting. So the recent lawsuits that came out filed by the New York Times, The Intercept, Raw Story, Getty, and Alternate against OpenAI, Microsoft, Stability AI, and others for using vast troves of their articles and images to train ChatGPT, and other generative AI products and services. OpenAI and the other companies building the new generation of AI tools did not ask permission for the use of these stories and are not compensating the news organizations for the work, but instead are arguing that their actions are carried by the fair use doctrine. And then when they talk about the story here, they say that the fight between news organizations and big tech and the rules around AI unfold, we should be looking at the policymakers to set rules and ensure a level playing field so that journalism survives and thrives in a tradition to AI. So Nielsen's trying to go and say this here. But again, they want to think policymakers can create some bargaining code to help out these publications. That's not going to happen. They already failed at that. They tried to do it in Australia. It's failing right now. Meta don't want to be a part of it. Google doesn't want to be a part of it either. Canada has the same problem. So you're not going to get the policymakers to make any changes in here because that's what these publications want. They want their ad revenue that they are owed to, they say, but they're not going to get it. So this story right here from Nielsen, of course, they want to say like, oh, try to build AI models. They need to do it themselves. Sure. But now we're at the point where companies are just being bought out. They're just going to take a payoff from the tech AI companies and just let themselves go and just get some money to kind of keep afloat. But unfortunately, they're not going to stay afloat for long. They're going to go by the wayside too. And just keep that in mind as I go and close out the show tonight, because that's what's going to happen. The tech AI companies right now in America, trying to go lawsuits crazy on these folks. It's got to feel like it did in other countries. And the bottom line is that the traditional media is running on its last legs, and the digital disruption, now powered with AI, is just making things worse. Anyway, come back next week for another Broadcasters Podcast. Remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.